Okay, today we are going to start Unit 2 by talking about regions, world regions, and we're going to look at where they are on the map. And these are things that you are going to have to know, like these parts of the world we're going to use in history classes. And this is like generally the categories that people use when they talk about the world in the news. So very important that you know where these things are. But the other part of the story is where things are affect what they become. So as we start to learn history, a lot of these places that I'm about to show you should stop seeming so random, and you'll start to understand the logic for why they are the way they are and how that relates to where they are. And so it'll become easier to remember as we move forward in the unit. Starting with the do first, you guys got a good amount of information about continents versus regions. Right? Continents are defined by physical geography. Regions are not naturally occurring landforms. They are categories that people make up to understand the Earth better based on one or more unifying characteristics. So one or more traits that they have in common, like language or like religion. Latin America, for example, is a region containing parts of North and South America, which are continents. So, did anybody have any brilliant ideas about when or why it might be useful to think of the world in terms of regions versus continents? If you can't see, the slide is now in the chat. If you have an idea, type it in the chat. Is there anything we can understand about the world better if we think about it as a section of regions rather than continents? Like Latin America is a pretty interesting example. Yeah. The question is, why might it be useful to think of the world in terms of regions instead of naturally created physical borders like continents? Like, why is Latin America an interesting region? Oh, maybe because of different religions or beliefs, says Isabella. And Isabella, that is a brilliant idea, yes. You can understand different things about the world and world cultures. She is smart. Based on what they have in common, right? So like Latin America is a part of the world where generally you can expect people to be Christian, probably Catholic. Generally people speak Spanish or Portuguese. And that's different from the way the United States and Canada works. So if you think about Latin America all as one thing, it can be useful in terms of like understanding the world. All right, the second question. These are hard thinky questions for y'all this Monday morning. What can you infer from the maps of Africa about why geographers think about North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa as two separate regions? So what's the difference between North and Sub-Saharan Africa based on the maps? Let's see if we get any brilliant ideas in the comments. Caesar says they have vastly different religious beliefs, and Isabella was thinking the climate, but she wasn't sure. And actually, both of you guys are completely right. You can have regions defined for multiple reasons. And indeed, Africa is one of those places, as we'll see in a little bit when we get to the slide. You can have it defined by physical and human geography. So good job, Isabella and Caesar and Alejandro, and thank you for participating this morning. All right, let's get ready to take notes. Like I said, notes are critical in this unit. Please take notes, please. You might want to start color coding stuff if you've already been taking notes. If you want to do this on note cards, you can too. Another option is to take notes on paper and then turn them into note cards to study. Yes, you, Alejandro, thank you for participating. I like it when I see people in the chat. All right. We're going to get started. So I hope that you guys are ready to take notes because we've got several. All right. starting off with just an introduction to regions. The first thing that I want you to write down is the definition, right? And again, we're not writing full, complete sentences. You're taking notes. You want just the most important information. So regions are areas defined based on unifying characteristics. And if you don't know what a unifying characteristic is, please write down that word. You're going to see it a lot. It means something that the region has in common, a trait that unifies it. And those unifying characteristics can be based on physical geography. Maybe the region has the same climate. They can be based on culture, like language, religion, historical development is huge. They can also be based on political or economic activities. And we're going to see examples of all of these. So some regions are based on culture and human geography. Some regions are based on physical geography. Some regions are based on both. And the point of dividing the world into regions is to help people think through trends and patterns across the globe. So you can see from Latin America that we think about like South America and Central America sometimes as the same region because of similar histories, similar languages, and similar religions. So that lets us see a pattern that a physical map or a political map might not let us see. Importantly, and like basically every other definition that we're going to look at in this unit, there is controversy about how these things are defined. Regions are defined differently by different people depending on what unifying characteristics they're interested in highlighting or looking for. So some geographers say South America, some geographers refer to Latin America. Sometimes geographers group Mexico in with Central America, sometimes they don't. It just kind of depends. And just to highlight the difference between continents and regions, right? Continents are huge land masses based on physical geography, having something to do with the continental plates of the Earth. I don't really know a whole lot about it beyond that. Regions are defined by people looking at the Earth to make sense of human geography based on common traits. So you'll notice that South America is a continent on the slide on the left, or on the picture on the left, but on the right, a region that a geographer could look at would be Latin America. Similarly, the Middle East, it's in green in the picture on the right. The Middle East is a region that technically it's in Asia. Sometimes people count North Africa as part of it. And so, you know, they're different. All right, our key world regions, and I'm going to show you each one of these in a separate slide. So you can either write them all down now, or you can wait and write them as we go through them and add a little bit of detail. Include, and I've grouped them by continent roughly. We've got North America in red, Central America in like light blue on the map in the picture in the middle. South America in lime green, and the Caribbean. Those are the regions of the Americas. Moving over to Europe in purple, we're going to think about Western Europe and Eastern Europe as different regions. We're going to think of the Middle East as its own region. In Africa, we divide Africa into North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Asia, we can think of in 4 regions: Siberia, so north, like the Russian part of Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. And then finally, we have Oceania. And I think I'm going to try to go through these regions in the order of human migration through the Earth. It's not going to be perfect, but I wanted to try so that I can tell you guys a coherent story. And the story of human history begins in Africa. where we have two major regions. Africa, we've divided into North and Sub-Saharan Africa. And if you want to like jot down why, not a bad idea. Like you guys said in the Do First, this is based on physical and human geography. If you look at the maps in the middle of the slide, you'll see the Sahara Desert in North Africa. So that's a huge divider, not just because it unifies those areas, but because in history, the Sahara kept people from like traveling back and forth. So you have like a pretty strong cultural divide there too. And on the right, you can see a religious map kind of laid over it. And you'll notice that North Africa is also largely Muslim, while South Africa is largely Christian. There's a second human geography reason for those two regional divisions in Africa. Once humanity left Africa, literally walking, the first place they got was the Middle East. So the Middle East is the cradle of civilization. It's the very first place that humanity built bigger agriculture-based civilizations. And the Middle East is especially important because of its contribution to history, especially religious history. There are three Abrahamic religions that originated in the Middle East, and we're going to learn about all of them in this unit, and every word that's highlighted on the slide is a vocabulary word for the unit, so if you want to write it down early, not the end of the world. The Middle East is the home of Judaism, the world's first monotheistic religion. It began in a river valley civilization called Mesopotamia. It's in modern-day Iraq. And also Israel. The founder was born in Mesopotamia and then wandered over to Israel. Christianity originated in Israel as well, many years later still. And then Islam originated in Arabia about 600 years after Christianity. And all three of those religions are connected to the original founder of Judaism, whose name was Abraham. So that's why we call all three of them Abrahamic religions, because they are related. The Middle East also has similar climate, similar history. We're going to get into it in pretty great detail in this class. Moving on to Asia. So humanity walked from Africa through the Middle East. Some people split north and went to Europe, which we'll cover in a minute. Everybody else kept walking all the way down through South India and up to China. Asia, we've split into 4 regions, partly because of history, partly because of climate, partly because of religion. If you look first at Siberia or North Asia, basically what we're looking at is the Asian half of Russia. It is cold. It is very cold, and that's the unifying characteristic. It's hard to live in. So there's not like a lot of cultural diffusion that went through Siberia because it's just freezing. Central Asia, which is in red on the map, like kind of on the bottom in the middle. Central Asia and the Middle East had similar histories and similar physical geography. Central Asia is very mountainous. Moving on to South Asia, basically what we have there is India and Pakistan and like the Himalaya Mountains especially. The Himalaya Mountains are a huge barrier to movement, right? So that kept the Indian subcontinent pretty contained, so like culturally distinct. If you look at the map in the middle of the slide that has like physical stuff, you'll notice that it's like basically all cut off. India is by mountain ranges, right? So India was the site of one of the early river valley civilizations, also the birthplace of Hinduism, one of the most ancient religions. Polytheistic religions still practiced there widely on that continent. And then East Asia. In East Asia, we have China, Mongolia, the Koreas, Japan. East Asia also is marked by history. especially by the growth of Chinese civilization. China had a river valley civilization too. And religion. East Asia tends to be Buddhist or Confucius, which is a philosophy, and we'll get to that later on in this class. Moving on down to Oceania. Oceania contains Australia and a bunch of little islands in the Pacific Ocean. And these are cultures that were actually like kind of left undisturbed for much longer than continental Asia. So like the island culture thing is the unifying characteristic. All right, so people who didn't split off and go to Asia from Africa in the earliest migrations went north. And as they went north, they reached Europe. Europe now is divided into two regions, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And these regions are based on a lot of history. They're based on religion. Europe is majority Christian continent, but Western Europe tended to be Catholic. Eastern Europe tended to be Eastern Orthodox, and that's before Protestantism existed. So that was like a original line. The Cold War more recently divided Europe into Eastern Europe, which was dominated by the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, and Western Europe, which was dominated by a NATO alliance. The difference between those regions was one was communist, one was capitalist. We're going to get into all of that in world history, but that's generally how we think of Europe, Eastern versus Western. And then finally, we get to the Americas. The Americas regionally, for our purposes, are divided into North America, which is a continent. We're on it. Central America, which overlaps a little bit with Latin America, and there's like a detail picture up on the slide. The Caribbean islands, and then South America. And even though it's not on our key points, Latin America is a region that a lot of people talk about pretty often, and it includes part of North America, Mexico, all of Central America, the Caribbean, most of South America. The unifying characteristics for these regions have a lot to do with history. Parts of the Americas that were colonized by the British or French tend to be thought of as one region, North America. Parts that were colonized by Spain and Portugal and that are therefore more Catholic than Protestant tend to be thought of as different regions. All right, so that was a lot of information. I just want to give you guys a minute to look at some regional maps to see if you can come to any conclusions on your own, just based on this. I'm not looking for anything in particular, but on the left, you'll see a map of countries that have been under European control. So Europe has colonized everything in green at some point in history, and then has partially controlled everything in like slightly lighter green. Only a few places have never been colonized by Europe, and they are in orange on the map, which is kind of interesting. And Europe itself is purple, so it doesn't count. On the right, I don't know how well you can see that. That's a map of major dominant world religions. Purple is Christianity. Green is Islam. The sort of like lighter purple that China's in denotes non-religion. That just means like no God necessarily, even though people in China tend to be Buddhist. And orange is Hinduism. Any patterns pop up at you from these maps? Any thoughts? Let's see if we can get some thoughts in the chat box. If I told you that Europe is predominantly Christian, are there any conclusions that you can draw from this map, these two maps? For example, Caesar says, many continents colonized by Europe tend to practice Christianity, which makes me think that Europe is Christian. Brilliant. Great. You're thinking like a geographer. Absolutely. Christianity, religion actually tends to spread with conquest, right? So as Europe colonized different parts of the world, it spread religion as well. So that's one big conclusion you can get from the map. Absolutely. Anyone else have any thoughts? You don't have to, but if you do, I'd love it if you shared. If not, we're going to move on. Okay, I hope that you've seen